Hello, my name is Camille Lindlahr, and I wrote my extended thesis, A Dark Stain, Colonial Ideas and Misrepresentation in Tintin in the Congo, for my BA Hons in Visual Communication Design, which I graduated in 2022, and my supervisor for this was Dr. Linda King. Just to set the scene and give some insight, Tintin was a fictional character written by Hergé or George Hermé in the 20th century. These comic strips were published in the Petit Vingtième, which was the child section of Le Vingtième, which is the newspaper that Hergé worked at. And Tintin was a news reporter himself who also worked for the Vingtième, and he travelled the world with his loyal dog Milou, or Snowy in English. And on his travels, he discovered a lot of crimes and adventures which he'd help uncover, and he'd always end up being the hero who saved the day. On these travels, he also made a lot of friends, which would become staple characters of the comic. The comic was extremely successful and still is to this day, which resulted in the comic strips to be published in real physical comic books. And in the 50s, George Louis was also able to set up his own studio. For the contents of my thesis, I broke it down into 3 chapters. For my first chapter, I looked at the history of the Belgium Congo, so I analysed what exactly colonialism is, and I looked at the beginnings of the Belgian Congo and what exactly happened there to really understand the setting that the comic was going to be based in. And then chapter 2, I analysed the comic, so I compared the first and the second edition. I looked at the misrepresentation of the Congolese people, which is what I am basing this presentation off, and I also looked at animal slaughter and brutality. For chapter 3, I looked at Tintin and colonialism in today's context, so I looked at court cases against Tintin in the Congo, comic books. I also looked at the recontextualization of Tintin through the means of bitter comics, and I also looked at Black Lives Matter movement in Belgium and how it helped bring up a lot of the wrongdoings that the Belgian people did in the Congo and King Leopold II as well. So this is a quote by Frantz Fanon, one of the theorists that I looked at while writing my thesis, and I found this to be quite helpful to kind of paint the picture of the rest of the presentation. In this quote, he states more or less that the white man kind of shifts the representation of the black people to serve his needs in that moment. So it's never an accurate representation. It's always the white man trying to look more superior or to make the black man look a certain way. So it always kind of gets shifted. When we look at the representation of black people through media, you can see that it's one carbon copy, just in different styles across many different areas. So these 4 examples are kind of comic examples, animation examples from Belgium, France, and America, and it's quite uncanny how similar these black characters are always drawn, especially when we consider that most white characters never look the same in different comics or animations, unless they're by the same creator. So I was really fascinated with this, how this is able to happen, that there's just this one specific look for black people that just gets used over and over again. So I found anthropology, for example, to be one of the key factors in this. So when looking at anthropology, I looked at the Petrus Camper theory of facial angles from 1760. Petrus Camper was an anthropologist and doctor who theorized that the facial angle determines how evolved the person is. So we can see to the left his version of a prognathic face, which has an extended jaw and is more like an ape face, which he exaggerated in his drawing here, which is a face that is usually common in sub-Saharan people, would be less evolved as it is more ape-like. Well, when we look to the left, the more Greco-Roman ideal face, which has an orthognathic face, so the reverse angle is more evolved and therefore would be more intelligent. This was proven to be wrong later, but it gave ammunition to caricatures and comic artists to draw their characters in a way that made the people believe even more that they were less evolved. So when we look at the version of Hergé's Congolese man here, we can see this extended jaw and this very prognathous angle, as we can see in Petrus Camper's theory. I found it very interesting to note here that when we actually look at the spread of humanity, humanity was originally based in the sub-Saharan region, which is one of the reasons why Petrus Camper's theory was later on to be proven wrong, as the people there had more time to evolve. Just an interesting note, I thought. When we look at an Irish link, we can see this being used in British caricatures from the Victorian times depicting Irish people in a very similar way. So it's a very similar situation where the British were colonizing the Irish, and due to the fact that the facial and body features between Irish and British were more similar than between Belgians and Congolese, the British were dependent on drawing caricatures of the Irish in a very inaccurate way to make the general folk of England believe that they were less evolved. So they went back to Petrus Camper's theory and drew them in a very ape-like way, which inevitably ended up in the Irishman just being represented by an ape, which we can see to the left. Then to the right we can see a more bit more real version where the woman just has a very bulky appearance, this very extended jaw, in comparison to this very petite, delicate British woman. And then the second factor that I found influenced the character design was theatre. So to the time, black men and women were not allowed on stage. So instead of real black people being able to represent themselves, white people would dress up as black people. And this was usually used to, like in this case, make the white woman look more desirable, or the white man look more powerful, or just to show that black people were less intelligent. So this was the main point of contact for the general public in Europe of a black person and their image of what a black person looks like. So we can see at the bottom here an instruction manual for how to apply what is now called blackface, with this coal black skin and these very large red lips, or white lips, which makes more of an effect on black and white imagery. So it's very inaccurate, very racist, and kind of made this looky-go-dandy stereotype. And I believe that this is one of the reasons why the comic figures often look like this, as this is what the general public would have in their head for a black person. So when we look at blackface in Tintin, we can still see it today in one comic from Hergé called Tintin the Broken Ear. So in the original comic, which is still sold today, we can see Tintin, who was undercover on a mission, dress up in blackface, and we can see the exact same features that we were able to see in the blackface in theatre, but also in the general character design of black people to the time. So these large red lips, wide eyes, black face, and then this was changed later on in the animated version where he's just a waiter. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it.